The reek of antiseptic was the perfume of my life. It clung to my scrubs, my hair, the very pores of my skin. It was the scent of exhaustion, of double shifts that bled into one another, of lukewarm coffee chugged under the merciless hum of fluorescent lights. My apartment, a cramped two-bedroom box that swallowed most of my paycheck, smelled of it too, a chemical ghost that even the scent of boiling pasta for my son's dinner couldn't quite chase away. Tonight, it was overlaid with a sharp, metallic tang of fear. It coiled in my stomach, a cold snake, as I watched Leo's small chest heave with the effort of each rattling breath. His inhaler, usually a silver bullet against these attacks, was doing nothing. His face, usually so full of light and mischief, was pale, his lips tinged with a terrifying shade of blue. 5 years old. My whole world condensed into 60 pounds of stubbornness, laughter, and a mop of dark hair so like his father's it was a physical ache in my heart. A father he would never know. A man I had run from with nothing but the clothes on my back and a secret blooming in my womb. I had signed the divorce papers with a numb hand, burned the positive pregnancy test in a rusty bin behind my motel room, and vowed to erase Julian Thorne from my existence. I had built this small, fragile life for us from the ashes of that promise. A life of perpetual struggle, but it was ours. It was safe. Until it wasn't. The wheezing grew louder, a terrible symphony of distress. My training took over, a cold calm descending. I scooped him up, his little body limp with fatigue, and ran. The hospital where I worked was only 10 blocks away, but in the cold Chicago night, with my son struggling for air in my arms, it felt like a continent. The emergency room doors hissed open, welcoming us into a familiar chaos of beeping machines, hushed, urgent voices, and that ever-present smell of antiseptic. My world. My battlefield. Only tonight, I was on the other side of the gurney. My colleagues moved with practiced efficiency, their familiar faces a blur of professional concern. They were my friends, my work family, but at that moment, they were just the people I was entrusting with my entire reason for living. A nebulizer was fitted over Leo's face, and the hissing cloud of albuterol began its work. I stood back, my hand pressed to my mouth, my own breathing hitched and shallow, mimicking my son's. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Leo's breathing slowly, miraculously, began to even out. The terrifying rattle subsided, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of sleep. The color returned to his cheeks. Relief washed over me, so potent it left me weak-kneed and trembling. I sank onto the visitor's chair, my head in my hands, the adrenaline finally crashing. It was in that moment of profound vulnerability, my guard utterly obliterated, that the world shifted on its axis. A subtle change in the emergency room's atmosphere, a quietening, a tensing. I felt it before I saw it. A presence that commanded space without a word. I lifted my head and my heart stopped. It wasn't just my heart. It felt like every biological process in my body ceased to function. He stood across the bay, flanked by 2 men built like mountains. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, a stark contrast to the sterile environment. But it wasn't the suit or the men that held me captive. It was him. Julian. 5 years had carved new lines of authority onto his face, adding a dangerous edge to the sharp angles of his jaw and the intensity of his gaze. He looked harder, colder, more formidable than the man I remembered. And he was looking right at me. His eyes, the color of a gathering storm, had always been his most arresting feature. They could be warm and filled with a private light meant only for me, or they could be glacial, promising a cold and calculated ruin. Tonight, they were glaciers. They swept over me, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, surprise, maybe annoyance, and then they fell upon the small figure in the hospital bed. They lingered on Leo's sleeping face, on the dark waves of hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. A long, silent moment passed where the only sound was the beep of the heart monitor. I saw the subtle shift in his expression, the slight widening of those stormy eyes as he looked from the boy back to me. The math was simple. 5 years. A 5-year-old boy with his hair, with the same determined set to his small chin. The air crackled with the unspoken calculation. He moved then, a predator's grace that was utterly at odds with the frantic energy of the emergency room. His men stayed put, but he crossed the space between us in a few long, silent strides. He stopped beside the gurney, his shadow falling over me, over our son. He smelled the same, an expensive, clean scent of bergamot and something darker, something uniquely him. It was a scent I had once associated with safety, with passion. Now it just smelled like danger. "Alara," he said. My name was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim. The sound of his voice, a low baritone that I had only heard in my nightmares for half a decade, sent a tremor through me. "Julian," I breathed, my own voice a pathetic whisper. He didn't spare me another glance. His entire focus was on Leo. He reached out a hand, his long fingers hovering just above Leo's hair, not quite touching, as if the boy were a mirage he was afraid to dispel. Then his gaze snapped back to me, hard and unforgiving. "Whose is he?" The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. My mind raced, searching for a lie, any lie that would protect this small world I had built. "He's mine." A corner of his mouth twitched, a cruel imitation of a smile. I didn't ask that he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was for my ears alone. "Do not lie to me, Alara." "Not about this." He reached out and his fingers wrapped around my wrist. The contact was a jolt of electricity, a shock of familiarity that was both terrifying and sickeningly welcome. His grip was like steel, a manacle of flesh and bone. The power imbalance was absolute. He was the king in his castle, and I was the ghost who had just stumbled back into his realm. My lie died on my lips, withered by the cold fire in his eyes. I had no words. My silence was the only answer he needed. The next day, the illusion of my safe, anonymous life was shattered completely. A sleek black sedan, the kind with windows so dark they seemed to swallow the light, was parked across from my apartment building. It wasn't just parked, it was waiting. It sat there like a patient vulture, an omen of a life I could no longer control. I saw it when I left for my shift, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw it when I returned 12 hours later, my body aching with a fatigue that was now laced with pure dread. On the second day, the vulture descended. As I fumbled with my keys at my apartment door, a man detached himself from the driver's seat of the car. He was older, his hair a distinguished silver at the temples, his face lined with a quiet wisdom that did not quite mask the capability for violence in his eyes. He wore a simple, well-cut suit and moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. "Miss Alara," he said. His voice was calm, respectful even. It was somehow more terrifying than an open threat. This was Marcus, Julian's right hand, his shadow. I remembered him. He had always been polite, paternal, and utterly loyal to a man who dealt in brutality. "Mr. Thorne would like to see you." "I have nothing to say to him," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Marcus gave a small, sad smile. "It is not a request." He gestured vaguely toward the park at the end of the street, where the faint sounds of children playing could be heard. "Your son, Leo. He has a chronic respiratory condition. Difficult to manage. Expensive." The words were delivered softly, but they landed like punches. He knew. Of course, he knew. Julian would have unearthed every miserable detail of my life by now. "Mr. Thorne has been in contact with a Dr. Albright, a leading pediatric pulmonologist in Switzerland. He runs a private clinic. The air quality alone is said to work wonders." He let the words hang there, a glittering promise of a life free from fear, a life where my son could breathe easily. It was the most brutal kind of coercion, a gilded cage offered as a sanctuary. He wasn't threatening Leo's safety. He was threatening my ability to care for him, holding up my failure as proof that I needed what only Julian could provide. I had a choice, but it was no choice at all. The penthouse was less a home and more a statement. It occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek, anonymous skyscraper downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Chicago. The city lights glittered below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The space was vast, minimalist, decorated in shades of charcoal, steel, and cream. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly soulless. It was a cage, and the bars were made of glass and breathtaking luxury. Leo, oblivious, was captivated. He pressed his hands and face to the glass, mesmerized by the toy-sized cars so far below. For him, this was an adventure. For me, it was a prison sentence. Julian was waiting for us in the cavernous living area, standing before a fireplace where blue flames danced over black stones. He had changed out of the suit into a simple black Henley and dark trousers. The casual clothes only served to emphasize the coiled power in his frame. He watched me with that same unreadable expression, his face a mask of stone. "He will have the corner suite," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "A medical team will be here in the morning to assess him." He was taking over, seamlessly inserting himself into the role of father, of provider, with an authority I had no power to contest. As he turned, I saw him wince, a sharp, involuntary movement. The fabric of his shirt was stained with a small, dark patch of red near his waist. "You're bleeding," I said, the nurse in me overriding the fear. "It's nothing," he grunted, dismissing it. "Let me see." The command was out of my mouth before I could stop it. For a flicker of a second, his old defiance met my new, desperate boldness. Then, with a sigh that sounded more like weariness than submission, he slowly lifted the hem of his shirt. A jagged, angry gash ran along his side, stitched together crudely, the surrounding skin inflamed and swollen. It was the wound that must have brought him to my ER. "Who did this?" I asked, my voice soft. "A hospital intern with more confidence than skill," he bit out. I couldn't stay. Of course he couldn't. A man like Julian Thorne couldn't remain in a public hospital, a sitting duck. "It's infected," I stated, my professional assessment cutting through the personal turmoil. "You need antibiotics. And that needs to be cleaned and redressed properly." "No doctors," he said, his voice flat and final. "Then I'll do it." I went into the enormous, gleaming kitchen and began opening drawers, my hands moving with purpose. I found a first aid kit that was better stocked than my hospital's supply closet. When I returned, he was sitting on the edge of a leather sofa, his expression grim. He watched me as I worked, his silence a heavy weight in the room. I cleaned the wound with gentle, practiced hands, my fingers brushing against the hot skin of his torso. Beneath my touch, I could feel the rigid wall of his abdomen, the tension thrumming through him. His body was a roadmap of violence, a tapestry of faint, silvery scars that I had once known intimately. This new one was just another addition to the collection. The forced proximity was an agonizing kind of intimacy. The air was thick with unspoken history, with the ghost of a life we once shared. In this moment, he wasn't the terrifying crime boss. He was just a man, injured and vulnerable, and I was the only one there to care for him. A dangerous reversal of power, one that chipped away at the wall I had so carefully built around my heart. Over the next few days, a strange, tense domesticity settled over the penthouse. Leo was examined by a team of quiet, efficient doctors who promised miracles. I fell into a routine of caring for my son and caring for my ex-husband. It was during one of those quiet evenings, as I was changing the dressing on his side, that he finally spoke about the past. The wound was healing, the angry red fading to a healthy pink. My touch was no longer just clinical. A phantom tenderness had crept in, a memory of a time when touching him was as natural as breathing. "They almost had me," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was staring at the city lights, but I knew he wasn't seeing them. 5 years ago. Right after you left," he paused, and I held my breath, waiting. "The Petrov family. They tried to wipe us out. Ambushed my father and me. I was the only one who walked away." The words were delivered without emotion, a simple reporting of facts, but I could feel the cold grief that lay beneath them. That was why he'd disappeared. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd been fighting for his life, rebuilding his empire from the rubble while I was building a new life from the rubble of us. "I thought you just left," I whispered, the confession tasting like ash. "I couldn't come for you," he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. The storm in his eyes was back, but now it was laced with a deep, haunting pain. "Bringing you into that would have been a death sentence. It was safer for you to think I was gone. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. The brief contact was more intimate than a kiss. Now, they're back. And they know I have a son. They know I have a weakness. The words hung in the air, a confirmation of my deepest fear. We weren't here just because he wanted his son. We were here because we were targets. He then admitted that the moment he'd confirmed Leo was his, he'd put his people to work. He laid it all out, not cruelly, but with a stark matter-of-factness. He knew about the 3 maxed-out credit cards, the payday loan I took out to fix the car, the exact amount of my student debt. He knew my landlord's name, my shift schedule, even the brand of cheap pasta I bought. I needed to know everything, he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. I needed to understand the life I forced you into. A part of me screamed at the violation, the intrusion into every corner of my hard-won, miserable privacy. But another, more honest part of me felt a flood of something else. A dizzying, terrifying relief. He saw it all. He saw how I had struggled, how I had fought to keep us afloat, and he wasn't judging me. He was understanding. The external threat materialized faster than I could have imagined. A car following me when Marcus took me to pick up some of Leo's things from the apartment. A wrong number called to the penthouse landline where no one spoke, but the faint sound of a Russian lullaby played in the background before the line went dead. The Petrovs were closing in, testing the defenses. The gilded cage began to feel less like a prison and more like the only fortress in the world. Julian became a phantom, spending hours in his office, his voice a low, dangerous murmur on the phone. The tension in the penthouse was a living thing, a predator stalking the silent, opulent rooms. One night, he called me into his study. Maps of the city were spread across his massive desk, marked with red ink. "They have an informant," he said, not looking up. "Someone who knew us." Back then, he finally raised his head, his eyes pinning me in place. "They're trying to set up a meeting, using an old code phrase. One only a few people would know." He told me the phrase, and a chill went down my spine. It was a line from a poem I had read to him once, a silly, private thing between us. They want me to believe it's from a trusted source. They want to lure me out. His plan was simple, audacious, and terrifying. He wasn't going to be the prey. He was going to be the hunter. "I need you to make a call," he said. "To a number I'll give you. You'll confirm the meeting place. Your voice is the final piece of bait. They'll believe it's authentic if it comes from you." He was asking me to step into his world, not as a spectator, but as a player. To use our shared past as a weapon. My hand trembled as I held the burner phone he gave me. I repeated the lines he'd coached me on, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. I set the trap. After I hung up, the silence was deafening. He came to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. "You and Leo will be safe here with Marcus," he said. "I will handle this." He leaned down and pressed a firm, brief kiss to my forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. A promise to return. Then he was gone, melting into the night with his men, leaving me alone in the heart of his glittering empire to wait. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I sat with Leo while he slept, my hand on his back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. Every distant siren, every noise from the street below, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. I was praying for the safety of a man I had spent 5 years trying to forget, a ruthless killer who was now the sole protector of my world. He returned just before dawn, looking like a wraith. His suit was torn, his face was bruised, and there was a dark exhaustion in his eyes that went bone deep. But he was alive. He was victorious. He walked straight to me, pulling me into an embrace that was fierce and possessive. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, now mingled with the cold night air and the faint, metallic smell of violence. "It's over," he murmured into my hair. "They're gone. You're safe." The next day, the tension had vanished, replaced by a quiet, uncertain calm. Julian found me on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the lake. He stood beside me, not touching, just sharing the space. "It's done," he began, his voice formal. "I've paid off all your debts. The apartment is yours, free and clear. I've also established a trust for Leo. It will cover all his medical expenses, his education, anything he ever needs. You'll never have to worry about money again, he paused, taking a deep breath. You're free to go, Alara. Take him. Go wherever you want. I'll arrange it. You never have to see me again. The offer was everything I thought I wanted. A clean slate. Financial security. Freedom. I could go back to my life, but a new, improved version of it, one without the constant, grinding fear of poverty. I could find a small town somewhere, where the air was clean and Leo could run without wheezing. A safe, normal life. I looked out at the city, at the life I had known. The long shifts, the exhaustion, the loneliness that was a constant, dull ache in my chest. It was a miserable existence, but it was familiar. I then looked at him. At this dangerous, complicated man who had stormed back into my life, turning it upside down. He had lied and manipulated and imprisoned me. But he had also protected me. He had looked at our son with a fierce, possessive love that mirrored my own. He had shown me a glimpse of the man he was underneath the armor, a man who was still capable of a surprising tenderness. Staying meant embracing the danger, the violence, the darkness that was inherent to his world. It meant Leo growing up in the shadow of the Mafia. But leaving felt like running again. It felt like choosing the cold, lonely struggle over the terrifying, vibrant warmth of this new reality. I thought of Leo, sleeping peacefully in a big, comfortable bed, breathing easy for the first time in his life. I thought of Julian's hand on my wrist, his kiss on my forehead, the raw vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke of his father. I made my choice. I didn't announce it with a grand speech. Words felt inadequate. I turned from the balcony and walked back inside, into the gleaming, silent kitchen. I opened a cupboard, took out the familiar bag of dark roast coffee beans, and began to measure them into the grinder. The whirring noise filled the silence, a mundane, domestic sound in this extraordinary place. I moved with a sense of purpose, preparing the coffee just the way he liked it, strong, black, no sugar. An act of permanence. An act of staying. He followed me in and leaned against the doorframe, watching my every move. The question was in his eyes, but he didn't ask it. He waited. When the coffee was brewed, I poured it into 2 mugs and turned to face him, holding one out. Our fingers brushed as he took it. I met his stormy gaze, my heart steady for the first time in days. He needs his father, Julian. My voice was clear and strong. I let him see the truth in my eyes. It wasn't just about Leo anymore. He searched my face for a long moment, and then, slowly, a real smile touched his lips. It was small, but it transformed his entire face, erasing the years of hardship and grief. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile luxury of his world, holding a simple mug of coffee, I felt a profound sense of coming home. It was a dangerous, uncertain, and terrifying home, but it was ours. And for the first time in 5 long years, I wasn't afraid.